So without further ado, Jenny, a warm welcome to you and thank you very much for chairing our first session this week.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. Let's see if we can get everything working. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first Housing LIN's Summit session this week. As Jeremy said, we're all about designing for happiness today, and our focus is going to our focus of our session is going to be on designing happy, age-friendly housing and how it promotes independence and feelings of community. And we're going to also share some learning from examples of what has worked well. As Jeremy said, we were meant to have our pre-conference reception at Limelight in Trafford, but world has changed greatly since then. So today we'll have a virtual look at Limelight instead. And I would say it's been interesting for us to see how the housing care models have been able to support people during recent months, keeping them safe and happy, and looking after their well-being in the time during the pandemic. And many of the design principles that we've used from HAPPI have worked actually really well during this pandemic. So we've seen people having large, generous balconies, have been able to let them be outside, they've been able to access space safely, and again, really help with their well-being. We look at deck access in a lot of projects that we've designed, and onto shared gardens. We've got openable bathroom and kitchen windows. This allows lots of ventilation through the apartments, as well as ventilation in the circulation areas. And of course, daylight is so important. Large windows and winter gardens take advantage of the natural light. And you can see here we've got a couple who are socially distancing, but also keeping in touch, which again is important for well-being. But Limelight itself, it's all about linking to the wider community, and it's one of the best examples I've ever seen of community integration. So instead of visiting Limelight this year, we're going to focus on three key things. We're going to have Ian Fletcher, who's going to tell us about the strength of good collaboration and how we can learn from it and how it can change your thinking. We're going to get on looking at closer look at Limelight itself from Graham Locke through the lens of the architect, and then Carly's going to give us an overview of the views and thoughts of residents that she's looked at through a well-researched guide called Just Living. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ian Fletcher. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Jenny. Let's see if I can share my screen. Hopefully people can see that. So good morning, and thanks for those introductions. And as it's a Monday morning, I hope that you're all like me and take a little time to warm up after the weekend. I'd like to start off telling you a bit about myself. I've been over 30 years in the construction industry, working on both the contracting and also on the client side in pre-construction and delivery. Currently, I'm a pre-construction manager for Wilmot Dixon in the Northwest, and over the last 10 years, I've been primarily looking at residential developments, a mixture of general needs, extra care, adult social care and dementia care, looking at the challenges that they create for the contractor, but also working with customers to engineer solutions for their sites. This morning, I'd like to give an insight into how we are looking at the future by observing the present. And as you can see, I've titled the presentation as Collaboration and Learning. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I want to share with you how we have changed our mindset for how designs are managed and coordinated, how the work of Professor Sarah Nettleton and her team at the University of York Sociology Department has corroborated this, and how we put it into practice. I'd like to do this by explaining how this has played out on Limelight, and then what customers are telling us what the future looks like to them. But just to say, there are no magic wands. Hopefully, it will create some thought into how you can bring this into your everyday work. Firstly, I'd just like to take you to the dictionary definitions of the two words. As you can see, collaboration has two meanings which could be opposites. And whilst I could wax lyrical on the second meaning, having been involved in many tussles in our industry, I wanted to focus on the first, as this is something that we've created as part of our culture. Just say the words in your head. You can't help but turn to why wouldn't you? But how many times do we genuinely do this? As I've said, I've been in this industry a number of years, and from my experience, this isn't the norm. However, we can make it that way. We have the ability, just by changing our mindset, to stop the adversarial contractual routes and pool our resources to achieve excellence for the products that we are creating. That mindset can change by learning from one another and using some of the skills, especially listening, that can come as difficult in our industry. Ordinarily, we end up with businesses coming together to try and create a team. A customer has an idea and naturally tries to procure a designer or a number of designers to develop it. The designers normally come with their preconceived ideas based around what has worked well before, but does it meet the brief? Have they been involved in creating the brief? And does the brief meet the needs of all? How you collaborate is up to you. However, if you think about the teams around you, whether that be in your organisation or in the wider team, do you call for full inclusivity? Do you call out behaviours which seeks to exclude certain views? And have you truly listened? As you can see from the slide, different kinds of meeting take different forms. And as you can also see, these were taken in the days before social distancing formed part of our everyday lives. In each one of these, the perception could be that they are all collaborating. However, in reality, it is probably the sticking of the post-it notes on the wall which is the truly collaborative way, where people are able to share ideas to create what is likely to be the brief. Times are different now, and if we weren't doing it before, it's got to be harder now. But it just means we need to adapt to get better at communicating. Our thought process around collaboration were germs of ideas that came together by chance. However, just over 2 years ago, I got involved at the back end of some research that the University of York were doing around later life accommodation. Their research was looking at what we are designing, why we are designing the way we are, and are we considering the needs of everybody who uses the building. After listening and contributing, it transpired what we were encouraging within our teams were what they were advocating. The University of York research over a 2-year period used various methods of engaging with different teams to see how they interacted. They carried out interviews, followed design teams and clients through their journey, but more importantly, saw where end users and staff needed to be involved. Their research came up with several findings, which can be seen at their dedicated website, buildingsinthemaking.org.uk. I've highlighted these 5 areas from the report. All these areas revolve around the brief. It is an area as a constructor that gives us a lot of concern. We don't want to build a building that no one wants. Ordinarily, constructors and developers are very focused on the result, and rarely is the end user or community involved in the process or understood. Taking one of those elements on the screen, I was interested to learn from a professor from the built environment that when he broached the subject of introducing a communications module in his architecture course, that this was frowned upon and unsupported by the RIBA. Yet this is what collaboration is all about. By being involved at the front end, understanding the needs of the residents, the users, the visitors and the constructors, we can achieve some great buildings. There are some great resources out there that ensure that HAPPI principles are brought into a design. Regulations need to be complied with, and we always have a concern whether we can get planning. But all of these follow. Regulation, design are a requirement that lead from the collaboration of the brief. But collaboration is all well and good. If we can't communicate our intent to those who are less technical than others, we don't stand a chance. I've attended a number of planning consultation meetings where local residents have needed a full explanation of what is on a 2D drawing. Yes, we are getting better with fly-throughs and all that tech wizardry. However, take a look at the picture on the left. I was pleased to be introduced to the simple way in which a landscape architect was able to discuss the future of a building's garden space with some cardboard chalk and a blackboard. It couldn't have been simpler. The residents were able to sit around and mark up what they wanted to see in their outdoor space and agree what it could look like. This enabled an inclusive, collaborative approach to how that space should be used and could then be translated to a 2D drawing. Their research, among other things, have identified this as the way to work. And it comes directly from the University of York report. There's no mention of the design team or the contractor. It's all about the users, not just the residents. And this revolves around the inclusivity of design, ensuring residents, staff, families, the community and the care provider are all catered for. So ask yourself, are your consultations too narrow? Should you be more inclusive? Now, I know from experience that you will always get to consult with these people all of the time. But what is stopping you looking at it laterally? See what has been done before, and can you learn from the lessons of others? Graham is going to talk after me about the award-winning Limelight in Old Trafford that we delivered together. It is a fantastically designed building. As a contractor, we got involved at Limelight at the end of a two-stage process just before planning. A lot of work had been done with the diverse community to consider what could be achieved. The design was set, it fitted the customer brief, and planning was around the corner. We set about moving forward to meet the customer's aspirations on time, design, and buildability. All the normal things that we contractors do when we get hold of a scheme. But was the design right? Did it meet everyone's aspirations? Could it be built in the timescales? And was this the facility that everybody wanted? Previously, Trafford Housing Trust had built a fantastic facility at Fjorda Gardens with PRP as the architect. Everyone on the customer's team referred to it every time we discussed the design. So we decided to see what there was to learn from this facility. Did everyone love it as much as it seemed? There were two views we were interested in, the residents and the staff. So we arranged many visits. We discussed the scheme with the manager, and it was interesting to hear that such a great facility had issues which they didn't like. Refuse strategy wasn't great, too much communal space, too big in places to enable the community to come together. We talked to the residents and got a similar vibe, especially with regard to too many lounges, that it was too big. We looked at Limelight and the design was similar. We spoke to the customer's FM manager to ask her about the scheme and what was good and what was not so good. Just simple social interaction, asking the questions which sometimes blindly passes by. We had time in the process and we re-evaluated and made changes which have benefited the scheme. However, with hindsight, should we have spoken to the community and other stakeholders to get their opinion at this stage? For completeness, our consultation didn't stop there. Limelight was always seen as a project for the community. They needed to be involved, and through the team at THT, we were able to develop the open space at the front of the building to meet the aspiration of many of the stakeholders. In there is a library, a bistro, hairdressers, nursery, pharmacy, opticians, along with a fully functional NHS facility, which needed to be consulted. This was designed as we were building it. To ensure this, we chose to keep a design person with the delivery team to engage with all parties, working closely with THT representatives and PRP. The design was fluid until probably the last few months of the build, but the key was keeping flexible with our customer and their customers, making sure that social interaction has started early in the process and was continued throughout. It is really unfortunate that people haven't had the opportunity to go down there as part of the summit. You will have seen a building where there are happy residents, a community that is totally engaged with its use, and stakeholders that have a happy place to work. We try and engage as many as we can, when we can, on most schemes. On the left is Little Lane Extra Care, we constructed for Wigan Council. The 39-bed extra care was to replace the life-expired 22-bed extra care at Brackley House. We used this to our advantage. We knew that many of the residents were going into the facility and were able to consult with them prior to the scheme getting drawn. We had direct access to the care provider and the building owner, and as this was near the existing facility and near local amenities, we kept the design basic. The residents wanted to remain as independent as possible. However, what they did miss in their existing facility was an external area. So we gave every resident a balcony that connected with their next door neighbour, and then a large garden at the rear where they could sit in a wider space. The feedback is tremendous from the residents. But did we get it right? Well, no. After consulting with the customer in the last few weeks, there are elements where they're making changes to their future provision, but that is all about learning. The other scheme on the slide is a 32-bed extension to an existing facility at Manleyfield House in Flintshire, which is due to be completed in April next year. And this design has been borne out of discussions with the scheme manager, the customer and the residents, who were desperate to be able to see across the valley beyond and the views that gave. Despite all the collaboration, there are areas where design is hit with building regs conflicts, customer budgets and assumptions about what we think is best. These three pictures are all telling the story and have been taken from the University of York report. The picture on the left was a familiar request from customers with regard to dual aspects within apartments. The feedback generally is that the residents put up a curtain and keep it closed, but I think Caroline may have a different but positive take on this situation. In the middle is a situation where the laundry was a second thought, and there isn't enough space to function properly. Planning the space for the end user and staff is critical, ensuring that each space is functional. And on the right, the architect has tried to create light and airy space by introducing full height windows, only to be scuppered by CDM and building regs, a costly solution. Situations many of you will probably be familiar with. So what of the future? Well, I'm sure none of us have a crystal ball, but what are we learning from today? Well, COVID has probably changed the landscape in the short term. Our customers are currently seeing a drop in demand. However, there is likely to be a greater need in the future. Our customers are telling us that they're looking to construct buildings for life with care packages that mirror this. And there are some good examples that have been designed, created and replicated by some providers. This will require an acknowledgement and learning from designers to go through the stages of later life care and introduce some future proofing. This could be as simple as wiring apartment doors so that door contacts can be introduced if dementia care is required, building in the ability to create more secure environments for users internally, or by having enclosed garden spaces where people can move around freely and securely. Our feedback is also there may be a less need for 2-bed facilities and extra care, but to design with more 1-bed facilities that has guest bedrooms available in the facility so residents can stay close by. Communal spaces need to be spacious and provide private areas where residents can meet the families, whether that be indoors or outdoors, and these need to be light and airy. Meeting places on corridors have proved popular, where residents can catch up with their friends in smaller groups, especially through these COVID times. Outdoor spaces have been a premium this year, as meeting people outside has created a new phenomenon. However, this creates a dilemma for the developer. The gardens must be maintained and this increases service charge, and it is a conundrum that has to be overcome. What I will say is that the extra care facility designs that have crossed my desk recently are not taking this into account, but the designs are maximising the footprint on the site. And finally, with building regs becoming more stringent towards 2025 and the use of gas boilers becoming phased out, we are now looking to different technologies that are new to us in the UK. They are currently more expensive, but in the long term, as we move towards zero carbon or passive house facilities, our mindset will need to change once again. We will need to learn what others have done before. We mustn't forget, however, our world is continuing to heat up, and we must make sure that our buildings have better temperature control and ventilation, as Jenny said. Hopefully, that has given an insight into how we are collaborating to get the best designs for our schemes. That this aligns itself to social research and what our customers are considering today. I will say, however, the road is not straight. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. Thank you very much, Ian. It's a really useful introduction to the topic. Okay, so welcome to Limelight. As Jeremy said, it's really unfortunate that people couldn't come along to see this building in March. I know Trafford Housing Trust were looking forward to entertaining and showing you around the scheme that they're very proud of. So what is Limelight? It was opened in December 2017. It is a pioneering project which sits at the very heart of Old Trafford. It's an integrated hub which places older people at the very centre of their community. This development integrates 81 extra care apartments and associated amenity spaces with 2 GP practices, alongside a range of council and social enterprise services. It includes a library, a community cafe, a flexible event space, a 52-place registered children's nursery, sports and recreation facilities, all made possible by the reprovision of St Bride's Church and Rectory. But this isn't just about a single standalone project. Limelight is one of projects which forms part of the wider regeneration of Old Trafford, a regeneration programme which started back in 2007 and which has sought to transform the wider area by creating a wider choice of housing in order to create a more sustainable community. This is the master plan for Old Trafford area, and it evaluated all of the existing housing stock owned by Trafford Housing Trust, in particular the future of its 9 high-rise tower blocks, the walk-up flats, and outdated sheltered housing within the area. The aim of the master plan was to integrate new housing within an established residential area. 9 projects were identified, and many of these have now been completed, and a new identity for the area is emerging. Alongside the delivery of new homes, the master plan considered the need for community facilities, which will become the central focus of the wider area. And the Limelight sites were specifically selected because of its accessibility to the diverse neighbourhoods around it. And you can see Limelight there highlighted in the centre of the master plan area. With Homes England funding in place, we were in a position to start work with both existing and future building users to develop a brief for the building. As Ian alluded to, this was a brief developed jointly with a wide group of stakeholders. And at the very start of the concept, PRP hosted a design charrette, effectively a kickstart meeting, which brought all of the stakeholders together in a single room. And it allowed them to explore how they could work better together, adding further value to the services they already delivered in the area. So this wasn't just about design of a building, this is about the design of a service to be run from that building. Joined up thinking on service delivery, it's also enabled a more efficient building that shared spaces, one building, one service. In terms of the stakeholders, these include, first of all, the landowners, 3 of them, the Housing Trust, Trafford Council, and the Diocese of Manchester. Existing stakeholders who use the existing buildings, a community centre, and library on the site. Possible stakeholders that were looking to get into the area to improve the health and well-being of local residents. And then the users and services operated from the existing facility. Over 30 groups use the existing facility. To support design development, the client appointed a team of around 10 community champions who all lived in the area. These champions engaged with the local community, assisted at consultation events, and acted as conduits, directing both positive and negative points back to the design team. As the design progressed to the detailed stage, many of these champions worked with particular focus groups to refine the community brief ahead of planning. These focus groups included landscape, as Ian mentioned, but also interiors, and also how the Limelight will be managed in the future. Consultation events were held monthly over an 8-month period, and this process enabled the design to be tested and to evolve to meet the aspirations of both stakeholders and the community. And many within the community developed a real sense of ownership of the scheme, which has continued to this day. But as Ian alluded to, this wasn't the end of the process. This went on throughout the construction stage as well. The optician came in much later. The nursery was a later addition. We completely redesigned the health centre after review by NHS England to meet their needs. In terms of the master plan site, the original uses included a tired but popular public library and community centre, which is to the left, and a sheltered housing development, which was no longer fit for purpose. Bang in the middle was St Bride's Church and its rectory. And the client's ambition for a new civic building could not have been, or could have been thwarted if a single larger site couldn't be assembled. However, the Diocese of Manchester, along with its new rector, understood the vision for the wider area and the importance of this development and agreed to relocate to the adjoining site, compensated by a new church, and St Bride's remains an important part of the Limelight village. St Bride's Church opened its doors in 2016, freeing up the larger site. In our initial assessment of the site, we saw an opportunity for St Bride's Way to become a community street, where the entrances to the new community space and St Bride's Church were all located. This had the opportunity to create a new civic space to run the length of St Bride's Way and enable larger community events to be held in the area. We wanted to manage Shrewsbury Street as a traditional residential street, and the private entrance leading to the extra care is from here, set behind the landscape community gardens, which Ian referred to, and which has helped to soften this Victorian street. And to the north, a wellbeing wing on Clifton Street provides a private access to a series of function rooms and flexible event spaces, including its own events kitchen. There are also FA standard sports changing rooms here, located at the base of the building and open directly onto the street and allowing the adjacent cricket and football fields to be better utilised by local teams and for those teams to play at a higher league level. Limelight has a clear public entrance, hopefully one that is warm and welcoming, and one where all the internal activities can be clearly seen from the outside, helping to encourage the community to enter into the building. It's a building that doesn't need internal signage. Instead, all the principal community spaces share a single vibrant space, and those various uses bleed into each other. You can find library books in the bistro, sit and casually read a magazine or a paper while you're drinking your coffee, and just put the book back at the end. The bistro sits on the very corner of St Bride's Way and Shrewsbury Street. It's highly visible in order to maximise its commercial success. It also allows activities to break out into the streets on warmer days. Whilst private area community cafe, it's also a flexible space used for life drawing, games clubs, even by the local knitting circle. It's the social heart of Limelight. The library area has freely available computer workstations and is very popular for after-school clubs. Has a dedicated space for younger readers and hosts a weekly rhyme time, a very popular event, and I believe some of the older residents and staff join in those events. Fronting onto the Shrewsbury Street is the Amaryllis Ofsted Registered Day Nursery, and that provides care for up to 52 children. And Clifton Street, the flexible spaces overlooking the open space, including football pitches, which is the top left. At the first floor level, there's 1,200 square metres of healthcare space, the Limelight Health and Wellbeing Hub. This is supported by a pharmacy and optician on the ground floor. And this space works so well because people can check in on the ground floor, grab a coffee, and then go for their appointment. They're using the wider building. But an integral part of Limelight is the extra care development, and it's 81 apartments. It's a very lean extra care with very few dedicated community spaces for residents, as these are all provided for within the community space, and residents are encouraged to use these spaces as part of their extended home. Opened in December 2017, Limelight has already had a positive effect on the community, staff and its residents over such a short space of time. With the key services, third sector groups and social enterprise integrated successfully within one building. The original brief was for the building for the development to be the most amazing, innovative, multi-use development, which puts people first, is delivered for and with the community to meet their future needs and aspirations, and which acts as a catalyst for change in the way such developments are viewed, designed, managed, accessed and used in the future. So what can you find at Limelight? It's not just a home for its residents, it's home to a community, a place for all, a space for you to eat with friends or relax with a coffee, a space to celebrate, a place to learn and to explore your creativity. Limelight sits in the heart of Old Trafford, and it's a place where the community comes first. Although in its infancy, and prior to Limelight being locked down to protect its residents from COVID-19, it is clear that the community has a sense of ownership, and the aspirations of the brief are already being delivered. There are some examples of this. New customers registered for the library increased by 500% in the first year. Book loans increased by 100%. The patient list size for the GP surgeries has also grown significantly. But the event space in Limelight has also been used to improve the health and well-being of the wider community, including for flu clinics, and more recently, as a breakfast club used by the charity LifeShare, which offers help and support to those who are homeless in Manchester. Community volunteering is also growing, with over 2,000 volunteer hours being given in just the first year of opening. And it's the volunteers that make it possible for the Limelight to offer such an amazing range of high quality activities. Residents are also enjoying the benefits of an extra care on their own health and well-being, allowing them to enjoy as much independence as they can, but with the added benefit of care and support on hand when required. Limelight promotes independence for its residents and has created a community that is truly intergenerational. Many of the activities may be similar to similar retirement living schemes, such as chair-based aerobics, but these images illustrate the wide range of activities, including the monthly open mic night, where as many as 50% of the residents join the wider community in the bistro. Limelight is a building where children from the nursery can go up to the residents' lounge to share stories or help each other with craft activities. And around now, this would include making Christmas decorations. The Mosaic Cafe is a community-led cafe run by Trafford Housing Trust, but designed in partnership with the community, providing healthy low-cost menu. And during lockdown, it has continued to provide a delivery service to not only residents of Limelight and a nearby sheltered housing scheme, it also feeds the children in the nursery and the neighbouring Afifa Faith School. The consultation originally undertaken to co-design Limelight continues to this day, ensuring Limelight continues to serve the Old Trafford community. Limelight has adapted during the pandemic, offering a takeaway food service for residents, as well as a click and collect library books, although I believe the library is hoping to reopen today. The staff are missing the buzz and the conversations that they used to have as people move to the community area. They are looking forward to reopening, welcoming back their community and filling Limelight once more with energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.
Thanks very much, Graham and Ian. It's great to learn more about Limelight. I will attempt to share my screen now. I hope everyone can see that. Cool. Okay. Page display. Full screen. Okay. All right. Thanks very much for having me here today. I'm really glad to be able to speak with you all and learn from you all. I'll be talking today about radically accessible, wildly engaging places. Is the project name I'm working with at the moment. I work as a research affiliate with the MIT Age Lab, and I'm also an architectural designer focused on intergenerational environments. So these are a few of the topics I'll run through today, but I'll just start off with how I got into this space and the idea of having greater expectations for design. So it starts with this basic premise of the fact that our environment hugely impacts our quality of life, as Ian and Graham's examples have really shown. And for me, this really became clear through the relationships I was fortunate to have with my grandmother on the left and the Holtons on the right, and these really meaningful intergenerational relationships and mentoring that they offered me, but also the fact that they just had this really amazing experience as older people, and that my image of aging and my image of what later life could look like was shaped by the fact that, you know, my grandmother was able to go whitewater rafting in her 70s, and Mr. Holton was able to teach physics at Harvard into his 90s, and this was what I pictured as my potential future. But I also then was seeing the fact that when we think about our built environment for later life, a lot of people have this perception of these hospital-like facilities. And I had my own experience with these types of spaces when my grandmother was diagnosed with dementia. And we were trying to find different care homes that she felt comfortable and that worked for her, but it was just such a stark transition from the really special, unique home that she left that really related to who she was, then moving into a space that didn't do that. But we were fortunate to find one that had a garden space and a music room. And even at the point when she wasn't able to communicate with us directly, I could see that these spaces made her light up. And that was so powerful as a child to realize that the environment can have that type of impact on a person. So this has led to, you know, my motivation to try to design more of these spaces that we see on the right into, you know, and change this perception of the spaces on the left, and take away this stigma and these stereotypes and this perspective shift, and as Ian mentioned, this mindset as well around how we design for later life, and transition more to this approach where we can be really aspirational and maybe a little bit more radical as well with how we design. And this comes back to the idea that we should have higher expectations for our environment. I think this Argos study really highlights the fact that we often don't have these expectations for our environment. Argos found that when asked what the biggest annoyance was in the shopping experience, 47% of people said slow walkers was the biggest annoyance. But when you think about it, it's really the fact that the aisle or the sidewalk wasn't designed to be wide enough to accommodate people moving at different speeds and with different needs. So the design and the built environment is really the issue, but we blame people because we forget that we control the design of our environment sometimes. And I think this goes to the idea of not designing with the medical model of disability. So not having the approach that you must modify yourself to the environment, but rather taking the social model of disability into our design approach, and the idea that the environment should be modified to work for you. This quote by Emily Nunko, I think, summarizes this well, is that the medical model views disabled bodies as impaired. The social model points out that the environment was never built for them in the first place. So the question becomes, how can we design our homes and communities to improve people's quality of life? I think we can start this question off by looking at where we're missing information and where the gaps are around our understandings of how to address quality of life. And in terms of architecture, this gap starts out with the design education and the fact that we often design for a generic healthy human. And yet, when we look into the research and the data, we know that 1/3 of people in their late 80s have difficulty undertaking 5 or more basic daily activities. We know that 25% of the entire population is either directly or indirectly affected by disability. And then we know that this isn't translating into design when, in a broad enough way when we see things like only 7% of current homes have basic physical accessibility features. And then at this point, you might ask, isn't this what the regulations and policies are for? We know how important and critical these regulations and policies are, but they aren't, they can be more comprehensive, and they can also, rather than having them be perceived as this tick box exercise, we can maybe have an additional approach layered on that creates more creative responses and more provocations to add to this already really critical step in the process. So that we can take this idea of these rules that we're following, but also then design and with the mindset that there can be really multiple benefits that come out of designing this way. Sometimes people approach this with a universal design approach in mind, but this one size fits all is often a unicorn. So I advocate for the inclusive design approach, as as Ian mentioned in his talk, but this idea of one size fits one, and we need to understand that there's a huge diversity of what that size is, and that to understand that everyone has a different experience. So the rule of thirds is an idea that I've seen. There's a pattern that kind of occurs, that these groups of threes that has come up in terms of how to design for this more comprehensive look at quality of life. And it starts out with the access trifecta. In the bottom of this triangle, we have physical access, which I'm sure this audience is really well versed on, and the idea that that's critical to being able to use a space. Equally critical is cognitive and sensory access, and this idea of needing these two elements in order to meet our basic needs of being in an environment. And then the social access piece is equally important in achieving this access trifecta to meet these basic needs that are reflected in Maslow's hierarchy shown here. And the social piece is the one that I think is often left out of being included in the policies or the brief as well. In terms of specifics, sometimes it might be harder because maybe there's less quantifiable information, but we're starting to see much more of that. And especially now during the pandemic, we're starting to really, everyone experience the impact that isolation and loneliness can have on our health and well-being. Some of these statistics highlight that. Socially isolated people's risk of death is 31% higher than those who are not isolated. Social interaction makes us 12% less likely to develop dementia. And disconnected communities could be costing the UK economy 32 billion every year. And so I think John Gale is always a good place to go back to with this, is that only architecture that considers human scale and interaction is successful architecture. And this is true across all scales. So applying this idea of a broader view of access within the home, across the property or the building, or the development, and into the neighborhood. So a few examples of how this could be applied in terms of social access in different precedents or to follow. But first, it's important to say that architecture can't force people to connect. It can only plan the crossing points, remove barriers, and make the meeting places useful and attractive. I think this quote from Denise Scott Brown is really important to say, and it's because it's not about forcing these relationships, but it's about not blocking them out. So having them be designing spaces that enable them to be possible should people choose to take up the opportunity. And this theory from Ray Oldenburg, I think, can be useful in this sense in terms of the third place. So we have the first place of the home, the second place of the workplace, and the third place are these inclusively social spaces in between the work and home, where we have these chance encounters and these opportunities to meet people. And these can vary. If we're in a suburban context, maybe we don't have as many. But if we're in a more walkable mixed-use community, we have more opportunities for these third places. So one example, I think, that expands upon this idea of third places is from Nina and Gerald, who I showed at the beginning. They live in Cambridge, where Gerald's able to easily walk to campus where he teaches. But one thing they shared with me from their experiences through living across the US and in Europe is that you really need this third thing that catalyzes that little spark that makes the conversation possible with a stranger. So not only to design the third place, but then also to think about what possible third things could go there that create that excuse for a conversation. Bob is another example he lives in London, and he's in Pargeter Court, right in the heart of Soho. And he's able to walk to his newspaper and grab it every morning. The guy keeps it for him if he starts to run out. And he has his coffee and bakery, these routine places. So he has this really walkable social access. But also within his home, he has these different spaces. And when he was touring me and showing me the fact that, they can choose what they want to do in the flexible room on the left. He gets to meet neighbors in the laundry room, and he gets to wave to the neighbors who choose to just sit by the lift and watch the world go by when they want to. That these have been places where he's been able to create community within his building. And this goes back to the example Ian mentioned, that I think is a really great example of the fact that everyone will want different things for their spaces, and to provide choice is really important. In this case, Bob really liked the fact that the corridor had these windows into the kitchen that people could choose to keep the curtains closed or open. And I think partly to do with the fact that the building was only 19 flats, and that he knew everybody, and that when he knew that Maria, when he walked by, wanted him to wave and have that little check-in, and that made them feel good and secure about being there. So these things were things he mentioned as positives in his mind, but of course there's many people that might feel differently. And I think that's why this idea of having the choice and then also just that collaboration or learning from different users at the beginning is so critical. But I think the main takeaway with this idea is that if you provide a little bit of extra space, you have more chance for the social opportunity should you wish. And this shows the access trifecta sort of in action across all three sides of the triangle. So the top left corner shows your minimum standard corridor. The corridor below shows your wider corridor to enable easier physical access. And this corridor here shows when you consider maybe cognitive and sensory access, when you look at the different doors to know which one is your flat. And if you add a little bit of perch seating along the wall where you can rest your bag to get your keys, but you can also have a little chat with a neighbor, and having these more generous spaces. Lena is the last example at the Barbican, and she lives in Gilbert House and has a quick walk to the library where she's held a knitting club for the last 10 years. And the Barbican, I think for her, has been a great example of having just these things right at her doorstep, but having choices in how she used them, and having sight lines where she lives right up here, but having sight lines to all the available public realm as well. It has been important to her. I think it's exemplified in the Barbican terrace seating, the fact that choices can really provide different opportunities to engage in different ways, where there's 9 types of seating. So you can go from being in a very social seating design that's faced towards one another, or you can have your own moment to be alone, but among many people. The table settings have been designed with social dimensions that enable strangers to sit with one another comfortably, because there's enough space in between that it's not awkward when you join somebody. And this has been a pattern that you see on a busy day. And then you just need that third thing to catalyze that conversation. Another thing the Barbican really goes above and beyond on is the diversity of types of units. There's 141 different types, and that inevitably leads to a diversity of people when you have that many different types. And that's how, a good first way to go towards an inclusive community. And that's sort of the goal, is that these diverse, desirable third places and third things are able to maybe help us get a little bit more of that social access should we want it. Especially given the fact that, the pandemic is changing things in terms of the first place and second place becoming conflated. Those third places become even more important. And this idea that if we don't have them, how do we get connected to our community? So how are those designed in for us? And how do we have these moments throughout our day-to-day? And so then the question becomes, I guess, how do we take these aspirations to action? And I think the PRP examples shared were really great demonstration, but just a quick sort of overview of how I've been thinking about this is to embed the social access into our process. starts with taking the time to understand and build empathy, learning from people of all ages and all abilities, learning from specialist input and testing out creative solutions and looking at precedents and taking time to do this. And then it's not about having all the answers, but asking more provocative questions, not just looking at the prescriptive rule, but then looking and challenging those assumptions and putting those questions out there and learning from the different answers that you hear. And the fact that a little creativity can go a long way, that designing a level threshold to a space that has access to other people can make a huge impact on people's lives. And it's not always about the latest and greatest technology. So these three things, I think, can be a really good start for the, the design education or any project. And these are a way to help us get away from this binary, but rather into this top right corner. And there's starting to be a lot of momentum around this, which is super exciting. With all these different projects happening in the UK and lots of things that Housing LIN have been sharing. And so at the end of the day, if we are responsible for creating our environment, why not make it radically accessible and wildly engaging? Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Carly and Ian and Graham. We've got quite a lot of questions starting to come in, so shall we launch into a few of those? I think Ian, particularly for you, there's a question from Helen Brown asking that you mentioned the future demand is most likely to be for one beds. Do you have any evidence for that and why this might be?
So that was based on, I wouldn't have been true to myself if I hadn't have been asking the questions of our current customers. I think what the feedback that we were getting was that whilst it's nice to have people around and being able to stay overnight, that's not always what people want, and it's sometimes good that they have the ability to be able to get into their routines and that people can still stay within the same environment, but can actually walk out of the front door at bedtime, say. I suppose it's preference from a customer perspective, and that's where I was coming from. And to be fair, their designs from that customer are now coming out as majority one beds rather than two beds, but it'll all be with regard to circumstance. All of these things that we've talked about today are about the needs of the people in that area. And when we talk about extra care being light or full-blown extra care like we've seen today, it will all be around where things are and what the need is specific to that customer, really.
Can I ask specifically what the tenure was in that instance? Was it affordable or was it mixed?
Affordable rent.
So and presumably for that area and for the market, that was what worked. Yeah, absolutely
right. And I think, as I say, it isn't a one size fits all. Carly's said that's absolutely right. You've got to be, so this is part of the brief scenario that I spoke about. Take the brief correctly from the customer. They are working on the principle that they've already built some extra care, and that is the feedback that they're getting from their customers who are in those facilities.
Okay. I'm going to jump between you a little bit. So Graham, this is also from Helen Brown. She said, thank you, great community facilities with housing, but what was the political will that was needed to agree a scheme in this scale? How did you go about achieving it?
I can't say we achieved it. That was very much led by the clients. The chief executive of Trafford Housing Trust had the vision. He drove it through every organisation, through the City Council or Trafford Council. He engaged with the NHS in the area. The NHS didn't sign up until we've been designing it for about 2.5 years. We were actually building it before they signed the deed for this scheme. But Matthew had the confidence that he would get there in the end. I mean, how many clients look to move a church to actually get a scheme off the ground? And that's a £2 million investment by Trafford Housing Trust to free up a site. And it's cost the trust money, but the investment and the health and wellbeing benefits to the people of Trafford will be immeasurable over the years. But yeah, it was very much visioned by Trafford Housing Trust that drove it through. And we sat on their coattails and enjoyed the ride.
Fair enough.
Jenny, can I just come in? Because I think
Yes,
had we
please.
been at Limelight back in March, we would have also heard from Paul McGarry and some of the team at Manchester and the work of the Greater Manchester Councils, and particularly around how they are leading the way in many regards, developing age-friendly communities across all 10 authorities of the combined authorities. So again, the political leadership, both in Trafford and at the Trust, as well across the authorities, and overseen by Andy Burnham, the mayor, as well, I think has also had some stimulus for more of those types of developments to be developed since Limelight as well.
I think for me, I thought actually when you were speaking, Graham, as well, the fact that the diocese, they were such an important part of the jigsaw puzzle, because if they hadn't moved in the first bits, you wouldn't have been able to do any of it. So I think working out how the jigsaw puzzle all fitted together is actually one of the most skillful parts of it. As you
And
say,
that's probably the most difficult part. That's probably the most difficult part of the process, getting their buy-in. That took a lot of negotiation, a lot of Tuesday evenings sat in their parish talking about.
I was just going to say, Graham, just to add to that, I remember us being delayed on signing our contract at the final hour because of one of those Tuesday nights.
Okay, Carly, I've got a question then from Carla Residence, saying, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience. 2 questions. Which options do we have for finding this third place and third things while in lockdown, or living in less accessible areas or in rural areas?
Those are 2 really great questions. I think in lockdown, I mean, they're really tied together, because it's a lot more challenging to do the first to find those places if you're in less accessible neighborhoods. I think in lockdown, I think one thing is that I like referring to it as physical distancing rather than social distancing, because we can still remain socially close even if we're physically distanced. And in this case, technology has been really helpful. And also if you are in a neighborhood that is walkable and maybe have those sight lines outside of your window or upon your entry, you get these little moments of being able to engage. But if you are in isolation, then it's, that's another challenge that technology can help with at the moment. I think in terms of the maybe more rural locations and the more suburban maybe context, that's something that that's a big challenge. But it's there, if there are these little, I think, well, there's the option of densifying, but if people don't want that, then if you can plug in the third places if there's a draw to, if there's enough, if you want to put the cafe or the park, then you need enough people. People might say you need enough footfall to create such places. But maybe even in a rural area where you have the park or the place where people take their dogs for a walk, that can, even if there's not that many homes around, that can create an area that you inevitably have those chance encounters. But I think it kind of goes back to what the Holtons had shared with me about these third things, that even in a more remote location, what are the third things that are basic needs throughout a week or a day, that those are the places where people go. But I do think it's a really challenging question to answer. Does anyone else on the panel have thoughts on the more remote locations?
I could just step in before Ian, and I mean, we had Lord Best and the HAPPI panel in HAPPI 4 looked at rural issues, and we started to adapt some of the HAPPI design principles to look at the use of green space, those social participation and connectivity. And I think what struck me with all your presentations this morning is the role of community. So again, one size fits one. How do we create communities that still enable people to participate and respect their individuality as well as their collective responsibility? So, but the rural point, do have a look at the HAPPI 4 report.
I also think, just from a personal experience in that, Carly, sometimes when you look at particular communities, and sometimes you find a little nugget of something that's quite traditional in the community. And we worked on a scheme in Swindon, the housing we're also involved in, and we discovered that in sort of the old terrace streets there, it was quite common that people would bring a chair out the front and sit out the front of their houses and talk to the neighbours and people passing by. So in designing the homes, we allowed for little benches out the front of people's houses just to create those spaces. So sometimes just looking at the history of the place, or just watching how people use the space already, can actually just spark something that creates those little incidental areas, I would say.
Yeah, that streetscaping is so important, Jenny, you're right.
Another question then for all panel members. Briefly, do you think the new white paper planning for the future will help us build better and faster or not? That's probably Graham as much as anything else, or Ian. Ian, you're on mute.
While they're thinking, let me just step in, because we've publicly been on record that we were disappointed with the planning white paper. There was very little direct reference to looking at the needs of older adults and or people with a variety of impairments and disabilities, and how we can create more inclusivity. However, there are other consultations that have just ended which are more encouraging. So the consultation on accessibility standards, as well as a paper that the government has issued around creating a national statement of expectations for supported living, which includes ways that local authorities can plan around their future demand and meet the needs of all their communities, but in particular people who might require some levels of care and support. So the planning white paper on its own isn't fantastic, but do look at it in relation to other planning white papers from our perspective.
And I think also there's going to be a lot of policy that follows it. So it'll be more about the detail of the policy that comes out.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed more will come out of that.
I think the other thing to say on that, Jenny, is that it depends what you want to build quicker and faster. If you take the example of Limelight, to build that quicker and faster would have been impossible. But would we have got the same fantastic facility? Probably the answer is no.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, actually. Very fair point. This question for start with you, Ian, send your hair. Did you have any disagreements between community members or stakeholders, and how were these managed?
Well, obviously, yes, because everybody's different, aren't they? I suppose I showed a slide with regard to the post-it notes on the wall. It almost takes the personality out of it, where conflict can come into play. That does happen with collaboration, but what we're learning is that the simple ways of getting people to open up and be able to put things forward. Not everybody wants to be sat within an environment of 10 people in the room and for them to be able to speak up, because not everybody can. But if you give somebody a post-it pad and ask them to go and stick something on the wall, invariably they will. And that means that they get some inclusivity. And that's then for us as designers and constructors to start looking at that and making sure that their thought process is taken into account. But yes, you are going to get conflict, and one size doesn't fit all, as we've learned this morning. But we've got to make sure that everybody is included and everybody is consulted with.
Yeah. And Carly, going back to some of your themes, how can we actually fill this accessibility knowledge gap that you see? I think that's quite an important thing to be able to sort of make sure we're moving forward with education. How would you see us filling that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that for me, it starts with building empathy and understanding more of these diverse needs. My experience with the MIT Age Lab, I think, had a useful way to approach that. They had this 85+ group that we met with regularly to talk about many different themes, and the group had many different responses to that based on their own personal experiences. So it was constantly learning from people. But then at the same time, they also have the Agnes suit, stands for Age, Gain, Now, Empathy System. And you can wear Agnes and start to understand a little bit of what these, what you might feel like in later life, or what your vision might be, experience might be like, and having this little glimpse into and being able to put your feet in someone else's shoes, I think helps maybe when you then go back and read some of the guidance or learn or listen and hear people's different experiences, it might help it stick a bit more. And then if you can embed that really early on into the design education, then that's something that can compel designers to like be self-motivated to look it up and to learn more. And so that's sort of from the design education side. And then hopefully, you know, if that can also happen on the client side, so then it becomes embedded into the brief as well. But I think we're also starting to see more demand and more, you know, this consumer demand that's then encouraging more clients to put this into the brief as a priority.
Interesting. And given where we are with our lockdowns and pandemics this year, what sort of ideas do you all have around how to collaborate in the short term to make it more efficient whenever we can't all be in the same room? Have you any good experiences of how that's worked well?
Well, it's different. I don't think there's any doubts about it, and we probably are suffering a little bit with regards to that, where we've had people in the room and people are more prepared to open up rather than it being on a Zoom call or through Teams. We're using a piece of software at the moment where our teams and our customers are jointly be able to put a sticky note virtually on a workspace wall on a laptop, but it isn't the same, and that we are human, so we miss that interaction a little bit, and hopefully in the next few months we'll be able to get back to a bit more of that interaction that we haven't had in the last 9 months, to say.
Okay. Any others, Graham or Carly, any other ideas around collaboration from a distance?
It's been particularly difficult at front-end design. I think technically we can have technical reviews and design reviews that work, but when you're looking to engage with team members and wider design teams about concepts, doing that virtually without being face-to-face is incredibly difficult. You miss the nuances of design. So we do need to get back to a newer form and normal as soon as we can, I think, to make that work.
So Graham, while I've got you here, I've got another questions popped up that want to understand about the community space and how they're managed. How did you manage the risk element of public access to community space? And then on the other hand, you've got some extremely vulnerable residents. This particular person said that they've had to close some public spaces because of behaviour between them. But how's that managed at Limelight? Who manages the sort of the main foyer space, the entrance areas?
It's shared. Trafford Housing Trust and the council have staff there. So the council offer many other services. It's a library, but they offer housing advice, payment advice, all those sort of things from Limelight. So it's a shared desk, but it's managed by Limelight staff. So everyone's badged in green. So you don't know if you're asking, you're not directed to someone else. You're directed to a Limelight member of staff who tries to deal with you. But it is quite heavily managed because obviously we've got a pharmacy, we've got an optician, we've got a cafe, and there's an awful lot of volunteers in the building all the time. So there's always people around. And I've never been made aware of any antisocial issues. People enjoy being in the building, people seem to respect the building and respect each other. It's in manage itself because that's what the community, it's a community building, it's what they wanted.
And is it open? How late does the main entrance stay open? How long is, into the evening? Is it managed into the evening as well?
Yeah, at the moment, clearly not. The GP surgery is open, but the Limelight's actually currently closed. I think they're hoping to open the library, as I said, today. But they're looking to extend that. The community cafe wants to extend into the evening, so it offers meals after school, after work. So they're looking to extend those hours. Some of the function rooms can be hard at weekends, at nights, so you can actually close off parts of the building. So it's very popular with people having large weddings. You can host a wedding for 250 people. That can be done without the whole line being opened. We can sequentially close down parts of the building and leave some parts open.
Yeah. Interesting. And have any post-occupancy reviews been carried out for staff and also for all the external users? Has there been much feedback since it opened?
They did a very big piece of work at the end of the first year, which was very positive, and they were hoping to do another one this year, which obviously they put on hold at the moment. But in terms of community benefits, they're all very high. You know, I mentioned a couple there about library memberships gone up, book lending has gone up, all these things are proven. And it is a true community. I mean, one of the examples I wasn't aware of is obviously last Christmas, the cafe was closed on Christmas Day and Boxing Day. So the owner of the hairdresser put on Christmas dinner for residents in there and had 50 people sat around the residents' lounge, something she did off her own back. So they do work together.
Fair enough. That sounds really good. Fantastic. Exactly what you want to hear. Then, Ian, I've got one question about parking at the schemes. Do you have any tips for parking at schemes and more of our customers driving and working longer? It's actually probably for both you and Graham. Have you any experiences around that?
Yeah, so I showed the Little Lane scheme on the slides. And what we did there was we had the space to be able to create, I think we created one parking space per unit because we understood that, yeah, people do still want their independence and still want to be able to move around. It wasn't in the centre of a town. And that was part of the brief, effectively, that, you know, people wanted to be able to get out and about. The difficulty, as I said in my bit, you know, developers, whoever's developing, you know, you want to create as big a footprint of the site as you possibly can. As you've said, you know, people are working a little bit longer, so people do need to be able to travel around and get about. And I think we just need to be able to balance the need of those people that are moving in there. We talk about extra care being over 55s in a lot of instances, but in reality, people are working into their 70s nowadays, and we need to make sure that we're catering for them and that they can get out and about and do the things that they have been able to do for the whole of their lives.
Ian, what I also love about what you've done at Limelight picks up on what Carly was talking about, is this intergenerational connection. So while there's privacy for individuals living in their own homes, there's also access to the community, but more importantly, the community coming in. And that intergeneration, I don't know, Carly, do you have any other thoughts on that? But sorry to interject, Jenny. But,
No, it's fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's just it. It's just I think it kind of goes back to that idea of mixed uses equals mixed users, and the fact that, you know, you shared that there are so many different ways to use Limelight, and that inevitably is going to draw people of all ages, and that's really exciting because, you know, you start having those chance encounters, and then it goes from there.
And do you think, Carly, with some of these little nuances that you're suggesting, do you think that they need to cost more, or do you think they do cost more to actually design them into schemes?
Yeah, I feel like the perception is that they do cost more, and that especially if it's something like more like wider spaces or you know, that increased area. But I think there are a lot of smaller interventions that don't need to cost more necessarily, or things that can be thought about very early on in the design process, just in terms of orientation and layout. And if a shared space is something that you walk past and you have sight lines to, such as the ones you were sharing for Limelight, the fact that you can see where the shared spaces are and that they're oriented in a way in the scheme that enables that visibility makes a huge difference. And that's just a decision that you would make anyways in the process. So I think a lot of them, it's just about having the awareness to think about them early enough to embed them in, rather than, you know, maybe hearing later that residents would like more social opportunities and then the retrofit, which would inevitably cost more later down the line.
And how do you sort of get that that approach sort of to become an integral part of a design brief from the outset? I mean, what would your advice be? But how do you start with that collaboration?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that Ian, you know, did a really great job of sharing their collaborative experiences on. And I think it sounds like with, you know, Trafford House Trust, I think was the name. There's, you know, you have that really inspired client, and then it kind of goes from there. And in that case of if, you know, everyone on the team seems really aligned with your vision there. But then I think in situations where if the client doesn't have that vision necessarily of embedding these ideas, then it can, so it, you know, if you don't have it from the top down, so if it's not from the client or from the policies necessarily, then there are opportunities to come bottom up with it, where you have the design really advocating for it or trying to be influential. But then also things like Jeremy has the HOOP, the housing options for older people. And I think things like this, where you can build more awareness for the people that are asking for these spaces and be more aware of what's out there for their, those options, then they might maybe demand more spaces like that. And so it can come bottom up as well, I think.
Okay. I've got another question from anonymous attendee, but question for everyone here. It's really inspirational to see what has been achieved at Limelight, and great to see the Trafford Housing Trust so on board with it. Do you have any ideas on how to inspire clients, developers and contractors who are less on board with this concept due to the additional financial costs that are perceived with coming with such concepts? How do you encourage early engagement with wider stakeholders, again, when developers are reluctant to do so? I think, Ian, you might be quite a good person to go to with that. What do you see? How do we inspire the developers and the contractors maybe less on board with these concepts?
So I know it's not easy, and I know I do have total respect for the fact that people have the challenges around cost versus value. I think what I would say is that if we're going to start being true to ourselves and building what we want, what people need more than anything, we have to start reviewing what's gone before. Anybody on the call, if you went down to Limelight, you'd see that is a community building that is being created and that everybody's happy with. If you go to the extra care that I mentioned in Wigan, exactly the same thing. And all that we did was we consulted with people. Yes, you have to have a vision, as Carol is saying. Everybody has to be on board with that. And so the things that you're doing of creating more open spaces and being more inclusive with the people that are in there, getting their ideas and sharing those ideas and making sure that you're actually building it for the people that are going to go in there, whether they be working or whether they be living there. Surely that gives you the inspiration to build a great building, design and build a great building, it should be. I think the University of York were very surprised that, when they started doing some of their research with constructors, a lot of the constructors wanted to build what was right for the people that were living in there, but we're kind of hamstrung a little bit in between times. And I think the probability is that we need to just understand the cost versus value scenarios in this and ensure that we're giving value for money at the right time and creating the right spaces for the money that's available more than anything, really.
Graham, have you anything on how do you get your clients and your developers inspired when they're maybe not so on board with these concepts?
I think what I'd say is that obviously we could do with a health and social care bill, be quite nice. More thinking between health and housing would be beneficial. Obviously, recently we had cash funding for extra care, which I thought was actually a really good way of getting funding into the market and deliver some good buildings. I think those sort of links at government level can help deliver both housing numbers and the quality of housing. But again, it's a funding round that came and went and probably needs to be replaced. In terms of inspiring clients, I think there's real benefits. There's local authorities are struggling to keep places like the libraries open. Having them in shared buildings, shared spaces where they give away land, potentially sell land. Limelight Library is largely managed by volunteers. It costs Traffic Council very little to manage that space. So there are benefits to the local authority as well. And
in these days where we're being challenged to always look at viability, and that's to do with, as much as anything else, how much it costs to run the buildings and service charges behind things. Presumably for something like Limelight, where you've got all these different organisations sharing space, there has to be a budgetary benefit to them as well, because they're sharing reception, sharing staff. I mean, has there been much feedback come back from Limelight from that side of things? Is it a cheaper building to run because all these services are together?
Probably not in initial stages. It's obviously cheaper for residents because the service charge is reduced. They're not paying for commercial kitchens or dining spaces. That sits within the community area. There is a business case. Limelight was supposed to be profitable within 3 years. COVID is year 3, so that's gone on the back burner a little bit. But I think they are on track. to be profitable, because they do make money from events, from weddings, all these sort of things they hire out space for. When they hire out a wedding, they can hire out the catering as well, bring the catering on board. So they're starting to make money, but it's going to be a couple more years. But yeah, the idea is this building just to generate money for the Trafford Housing Trust.
Brilliant.
I like the idea, Graham, of Manchester United using the changing rooms for their ground down at Old Trafford around the corner.
I'll go and lock the doors.
Yeah. Jenny, can I just quickly come back on two things? Graham raised some interesting things around, leveraging investment. So the cash fund, the Care and Support Specialised Housing Fund, hidden away in the spending review the other day, there's an additional amount allocated through cash, which Homes England and the GLA will have. So there is some leverage there, which is really good news. And I've been privileged to be a judge on the Home of 2030 competition that Carly highlighted in one of her slides. We had over 200 bids to assess, and 6 were shortlisted and 2 finalists announced last week by the Housing Minister. Those will now go through Homes England and their development panel to be built out. And I think what Ian showed in his presentation was about how do you scale some of this? And again, if we can bring in those sort of ideas and that thinking and get Homes England and the partners to collaborate with local communities, I think there's some really good examples that the 2 successful winners last week will take forward and be sort of exemplars, along with exemplars like Trafford scheme in Trafford.
Fantastic. So, Lewis, have we got any other questions that we've missed that want to raise?
Hiya. I think we've got a question just at the top there from Jane Lawson that a couple of attendees I think have upvoted. It's just around, I think we've sort of touched around kind of funding and commissioning, but I don't know if anyone wants to kind of answer that question there. So it's, did you come across any issues with funding, commissioning large service charges for additional facilities and amenities being funded by making properties unaffordable for people? And if so, how did you overcome them? And if not, how are all the extra care facilities funded?
I'm not sure who, because Graham, because the extra care have some separate facilities, don't they, themselves? It's probably, presumably their service charge isn't covering all the libraries, etc. on it. They're all,
no, certainly not. So within the extra care, we have communal spaces. There's a residence lounge, there's meeting areas, and it's, as Carly said, it's about making opportunities work. So we have a linking corridor across the landscape podium. It's been expanded, made wider, and serves as an orangery or winter garden. So it's actually a convenient place for people to sit and look. The communal spaces in the extra care are quite lean, and most of it sits within the community centre, and people are encouraged to go and use those spaces where they can.
A critical thing for us all, I think this is affordable accommodation, it will be housing benefit eligible, and that care and support that's going in will be either planned care and commissioned by the local authority in partnership with the CCG and others, or self-care. And I think what both Ian and Graham highlighted and Carly exemplified in the Barbican example is the growing amount of resilience that can be generated in these schemes as well.
So I think we're coming towards the end of our time now. I just wanted to thank our panelists. We have some 3 very, very different approaches to collaboration and inclusive design. I love the Ian, your residents, families, communities, all coming together with care providers, create that inclusive design. And yet Carly's given us quite a different view in that, inclusive design, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I thought that was a really good, and I love the term that we're no longer going to be talking about one size fits all. We're going to be talking about one size fits one. So I think that's absolutely a great thing to take away. Sorry?
We'll tweet that.
I will tweet that. That's a great thing to take away from today. And I love the thought of creating these third things. It's what makes people interact with their environment. So I think one of the key things I've taken away from today is certainly about collaboration. It has to be about listening. If you don't start with the listening at the very beginning, at the outset, and understanding how you create those incidental moments, then actually the building that comes at the end will be nowhere near as successful. And I think Limelight is such a successful building because of the listening that's happened all the way through that and continues today. So thank you very much. Jeremy, have you anything else you'd like to add?
Well, Jenny, thank you on behalf of the Housing LIN for chairing our opening session. It's been a fabulous session. Graham, you may not have noticed, but we had nearly 200 people joining us this morning. I know you're slightly anxious about the numbers, but if you found this really of interest, we're going to put the spotlight on some of the work the Birmingham City Council have done this afternoon at 4 o'clock for our second Happy Hour session. And as we've got on the slide, this week we're dedicating the whole week to looking at Happy, calling it the Happy Awareness Week. And this is not just around the physical architecture, but also the social architecture. So again, if you are interested in this, do please tweet and or follow us on the Happy Awareness Week and through the summits. But on behalf of the Housing LIN, thank you very much all our speakers this morning. A really informative and instructive opening session. And thanks to the team behind the scenes as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Well done,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Very much.